me. I have a question. Do you know any trans people? I'm Grace Ann. I'm non-binary or gender non-conforming, and my pronouns are they, them. And actually, people that I'm comfortable with don't tend to know me as Grace Ann, but as Finch. It's just the name that I prefer. You're all welcome to use it. And now, I don't frequently disclose this information, especially publicly, because unfortunately, I'm forced to be closeted in many of my most significant relationships. Despite it being 2021 and me having felt this way about my identity for almost half my life now, I still don't have a safe place to exist as me. Discrimination against transgender and non-binary or gender non-conforming, or we'll say GNC individuals, is a deadly epidemic in this country, and a worldwide pandemic which has been devastating our communities for decades. Yet somehow the rates in this discrimination still rise exponentially by year. I believe that if we learned about and understood what we were facing, we could beat it and save trans lives. Last year broke the record for fatal anti-transgender violence at 44 murders. On another hand, 40% of transgender and GNC individuals reported at least one suicide attempt in their lifetime after facing targeted discrimination. And now I understand that these topics aren't commonly spoken about and aren't often considered mainstream newsworthy, but I ask you, please humor me. Let's break down these numbers together and let's talk about it anyway. By March 2021, the Human Rights Campaign, or HRC, website had already reported that 17 trans and gender non-conforming individuals had been killed in anti-transgender hate crimes. This is due to the fact that anti-transgender discrimination almost always snowballs into catastrophic marginalization. Transgender individuals are often left unemployed, in poverty, homeless, or doing survival sex work. We know that these are major life risk factors. They're forced into this. The National Transgender Survey showed that in 2016, transgender and gender non-conforming people had a 3 times higher unemployment rate than the rest of the US population. Also, a 2 times higher poverty rate. 30% of surveyed individuals experienced homelessness in their lifetime due to discriminatory circumstances, while 12% reported being homeless within the past year. The majority of victims in this deadly hate, like every year since the HRC has been tracking and reporting fatal anti-transgender violence, are Black and Latina trans women. These women face a compound of different types of discrimination, including racial and sexist biases, which already put their lives at greater risk. The American Medical Association said in June of 2019 that the killings of transgender women of color in the United States amounted to an epidemic. These numbers have only grown in severity since. This photo is from a protest in support of transgender human rights called the Brooklyn Liberation March from 2020, as murder rates for Black women began to rise after outrage against the Black Lives Matter movement. Over 15,000 people were in attendance, holding signs similar to the ones shown. Black trans lives matter. These are allies. Each of these people. Now, fatal anti-transgender discrimination doesn't only result through direct violence. Countless transgender and GNC lives have been lost due to other forms of anti-transgender bigotry. Trans and GNC individuals face a risk of self-harm and suicide that is significantly greater than the cisgendered population in the US, and disturbingly, especially in youth. The Trevor Project website reports that suicide is the second leading cause of death in trans and GNC people between the ages of 10 and 24 years old. According to the 2016 transgender survey, again, 40% of transgender adults reported having made a suicide attempt in their lifetime. 92% of these individuals attempted suicide at least once before the age of 25. There is a terrifyingly high suicidality and self-harm risk among trans and GNC youth, specifically due to abuse and harassment in school, as well as family rejection. A national survey of transgender and GNC youth held by the GLSEN stated that 75% of transgender and gender nonconforming students felt unsafe at school, between discrimination from peers as well as faculty members. Trans students often avoid school and face truancy out of concern for their own safety. I, myself, faced truancy at school until the beginning of 7th grade when I went on to homeschooling to avoid the bullying and social marginalization that I faced. 40% of respondees to the survey reported having experienced anti-transgender violence before, or threat of violence. 50% experienced family rejection. 38% had experienced homelessness on account of being disowned by their families. This photo is from a very small protest in Singapore, wherein children are shown advocating for themselves. And this in turn inspired a larger movement in the US, which was #FixSchools, not students. This was in early 2021. And so these students are shown displaying, "Why are we not in your sex ed? How can we get A's when your care for us is an F? And trans students will not be erased." And now, while we honor the lives lost due to anti-transgender hostility, we must look onwards towards the lives of our trans and gender non-conforming friends and family who still have time to live rightfully and safely. These children these children who still have time. And as I said, these topics aren't commonly spoken about in mainstream media. And so education on the issues surrounding anti-transgender hate and the spread of correct information about transgender and gender non-conforming people, not to spread awareness, but acceptance, will gear us towards a trans-inclusive future. There are links to petitions and mutual aid funds in support of trans and gender non-conforming lives in the description of this video. Thank you. It's 10:53. It's not showing the date. Show me the date. Okay. It's May 6th.